Alright, so in this video we're going to try to go through the major milestones on the sixth day, the sixth millennium, from 1240 until today, and explain what liminal period we're in between the sixth and seventh day. So, according to the Jewish mystical tradition, we have now just passed half past noon on the sixth day. According to the Zohar, the shadows of evening are the end of exile, and the measure of this shadow is 6.5 hours from dawn. Once the sun begins its descent from the meridian to the horizon on the sixth day, the movement towards the following day has already begun. In the Yuga cycle, this may correspond to the ascending Dwapara and Treta ages. By dividing every 1,000-year period into 24 parts, we can calculate that every 42 years and 8 months equals 1 hour on the cosmic clock. Similarly, every 250 years is 6 hours. These are the biblical years, the hour on the sixth day corresponding to common era years, events of importance in the Jewish mystical tradition and history. So, the year 5000 on the biblical schema corresponds to 1240 CE, which is nightfall of the sixth day. So the days in Judaism begin at sunset, or more precisely, when there's 3 stars visible at night. There's a deep meaning behind why the day begins at night, because darkness precedes light. And this really has to do with the saga of creation that we're in, which has to do with the transformation of darkness into light, and the revelation that darkness doesn't really exist at all. So nightfall was in 1240, which also corresponds to this being sort of like the Dark Ages. But a lot of messianic speculation surrounded this date, as it was the year 5000, a huge milestone in the count from 0 to 7,000. And so there was an important Kabbalist named Abraham Abulafia, who is worth reading up about. He worked a lot with the letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the permutations of those letters as being sort of like the spiritual backwiring of reality. So in the same way that the letters recombine and different combinations and permutations of letters create words and energies, that's how God created the world, is through the spiritual energy of the letters. And that through meditating on the letters, visualizing the letters, sounding out the letters, we can sort of go from the multiplicity of the world back to the unity and tap into the oneness behind everything. So his doctrine of the letters was sort of like the spark that set off this sixth millennium. And there's a lot there about his journey to the Pope and his understanding of the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, which is very complex and which is open to many interpretations. So the next milestone on the sixth day is midnight, which was 1490. This was the first printing of the Zohar, the major Jewish mystical text, and the advent of the printing press. So the basic logic kind of behind these events is that something was happening among the mystics, and this also had a sort of rippling in the world events, inventions, new technologies, and ways of being human on this planet, and that those inventions really come from the revelation of mystical and secret knowledge. The next milestone was sunrise, which was 1740, and this was the revelation of the Baal Shem Tov and the spread of the mystical tradition to the masses, because the secrets were always studied in small groups, but the message of the Baal Shem Tov was to go out into the marketplace and to teach everyone that God is everywhere. No place is void of God. How to connect with God and with the unity behind everything in every moment of your lives, and not only in what we've bracketed off as the sacred part, but really to include the mundane, to include everything in your service. 250 years later, and that on the scheme of world events corresponds to the beginning of the scientific revolution, the Industrial Revolution. 250 years later, 1990, high noon. This was the year near the passing of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the onset of the internet age and mass communications. So there's a lot to say about the Rebbe. Basically, he is the inheritor of this tradition of the Baal Shem Tov, the modern inheritor, after the Holocaust, rebuilding this mystical tradition in America, in Brooklyn, New York, recognizing the important role that the United States plays in this unfolding. And interestingly enough, not insisting on moving to Israel, but seeing something about establishing his base in New York, in Brooklyn, which he referred to as the gates of Rome. It said that Messiah is going to sit at the entrance of the gates of Rome, taking off his bandages and reapplying them one by one. So there's a lot of pain and aching and waiting and distance. There's a lot of overdoing of the material realm. There's a lot of obstacles. Some would even go as far to say as the reestablishment of religious life in America for many traditions was as challenging as the persecution of those traditions, because suddenly we have the temptations and onslaught of material reality and the sort of hiding or eclipsing of God. And so with this unique challenge, we also have the very material that we need for this last stretch. Okay, July 2011, noon on the sixth day, when according to Jewish law, businesses may not remain open beyond this point in preparation for the Sabbath. In other words, something about the seventh millennium begins already. In July 2011 at noon. You can't really say anymore that after noon, after July 2011, belongs to the era before, because the laws of the Sabbath apply already. So where are we? Are we in the redemption? Are we in the exile? It's a liminal period. The shadows of the evening are the end of exile, and the measure of this shadow is 6.5 hours from dawn. In the last hour, in the last exile, he is like a cedar that is slow to grow. From the time it starts growing until it is mature, a day passes, and the beginning of the second day, until it throws a shadow in the daylight. So even though there's 227 years, well, 226 now, left until the end of the sixth millennium, these years are affected by the gravitational pull, so to speak, of the world to come. There are numerous increments in the time between noon and sunset that mark this progress. So, what we want to focus on now is how this liminal period is playing out. What is this liminal period all about? What's happening each month, each stage of this liminal period, moving us more and more and more into the realm of the Sabbath? And I want to make this very clear. At a certain point on Friday afternoon, if one lights the Sabbath candles and establishes for oneself that the Sabbath has begun, then absolutely for that person, the Sabbath has begun. And we're talking about a very serious realm of religious law, which has to do with the mystical underpinnings of reality. Doesn't have to do with punishment, guilt, sin. We need to put all of that aside. But observing the Sabbath is the centerpiece of Jewish life. And the sovereignty of establishing when the Sabbath begins lies in the individual. Now, there are sort of guidelines or like some kind of framework for how early you can say Sabbath has begun. Interestingly enough, it's a lot more flexible to extend the Sabbath as long as you want. You can keep the Sabbath until Tuesday if you're enjoying it. And some Rebbes do. As far as when to bring the Sabbath in, there is some matter of debate. But what is clear is that after noon, July 2011, we already see the first signs of the laws, meaning the nature, the inner nature of the Sabbath day, which a metaphor for which is the closing of storefronts across town, which completely changes the feeling. It's sort of like those New England towns where everything's closed on Sundays. The feeling in the street on Sunday is created by everything being closed. And if everything were to close on Saturday night, for all intents and purposes, Saturday night is pretty much Sunday. In other words, the human behavior is what defines the atmosphere that's created. And so we already see that July 2011, there are signs of this age beginning, and you can no longer say that we're in the realm of the countdown. We're in the realm of it's already begun. Now, at the same time, you could say that we're not entirely in that space where I can go and say, I am beginning the Messianic era right now. And maybe that's where a lot of our frustration comes from. Because there's still something about the nature of reality that needs to evolve and adapt to that moment. And it's happening at light speeds. And that is what we want to tap into and track in the next video.